Scripture. Part 1 of a 2-part No Fate Project report, July 2021, Timeline K1.
I'm Annie White here in New Zealand, and Derek is in
Moving on, we're recording an abridged reading of William Dyer's 1930s journal, recording his doomed 1931 journey to Antarctica. I'll be reading from Dyer's journal, while Ani will be reading Don Levy's comments from his research on the journal from last year. And this has been laminated, and this journal is really old, and Don Levy's notes are all in the margin, and there's all kinds of stick-it pads and all kinds of stuff written in here. So we're reading off of Xeroxed copies of this at the same time.
These notes analysing this journal are by myself, Dr. Richard Donlevy, PhD, Esquire, Level 2 Probationary Adept of the Nathaniel Pikmin Order for the Arcane Sciences at Miskatonic University. Mr. Morrell has assigned me this task. I'll earn my black fez for sure, if not at least the opportunities for networking in occultist and mad scientist circles are priceless. So Donlevy was more than he seemed, R.I.P.
Perhaps one could say more than meets the eye.
Derek.
Okay, I'm going to read Dyer's journal. I, Dr. William Dyer, am a professor of geology at Miskatonic University and was leader of the disastrous 1930-1931 Peabody expedition to Antarctica, financed by the Nathaniel Derby Pikmin Foundation at Miskatonic University. I am writing this journal to best record what I can recollect of that ill-fated expedition, lest I allow myself to believe it was all a dream, or the doctors convince me it was madness. I have told few outsiders, and definitely not the press, what truly happened outside of the inquest to the university and authorities. We, of course, were not believed, and had little evidence to validate our claims. I am all the more reluctant because my warning may be in vain. My purpose now is to discourage any future expeditions. I am forced into speech because men of science have refused to follow my advice without knowing why. It is altogether against my will that I tell my reasons for opposing this contemplated next invasion of the Antarctic. With its vast fossil hunt and its wholesale boring and melting of the ancient ice caps. Doctors at the Arkham State Sanatorium decided the survivors had experienced trauma from exposure to the unholy elements of the frozen continent. We know better because otherwise our health so far remained excellent, and though several savage windstorms had burst upon us from the west, we had escaped damage through the skill of Atwood in devising rudimentary aeroplane shelters and windbreaks of heavy snow blocks, and reinforcing the principal camp buildings with snow. Our good luck and efficiency had indeed been almost uncanny, disproving any suspicions. We were overcome by the weather. The university paid restitution to the families, and the authorities filed no charges. Lacking hard evidence, they just have our testimony and what remained of Professor Lake's wireless reports. As a geologist, my object in leading the Miskatonic University expedition was wholly that of securing deep-level specimens of rock and soil from various parts of the Antarctic continent, aided by the remarkable drill devised by Professor Frank H. Peabody of our engineering department. We planned to cover as great an area as one Antarctic season, or longer if absolutely necessary. Operating mostly in the mountain ranges and on the plateau south of the Ross Sea, regions explored in various degree by Shackleton, Amundsen, Scott, and Byrd, with frequent changes of camp made by aeroplane involving distances great enough to be of geological significance. We expected to unearth a quite unprecedented amount of material, especially in the Precambrian strata, of which so narrow a range of Antarctic specimens had previously been secured. We wished also to obtain as great as possible a variety of the upper fossiliferous rocks, since the primal life history of this bleak realm of ice and death is of the highest importance to our knowledge of the Earth's past. That the Antarctic continent was once temperate and even tropical, with a teeming vegetable and animal life, which the lichens, marine fauna, arachnida, and penguins of the northern edge are the only survivors, is a matter of common information, and we hoped to expand that information in variety, accuracy, and detail. Beyond a range of mountains higher than the Himalayas, our expedition discovered ancient non-human ruins and much more best kept there. I am not as skeptical about old tales and fears as I used to be, and could see my account dismissed as fantasy. We consisted of 4 men from the university, Pobodi of the engineering department, Lake of the biology department, Atwood of the physics department, also a meteorologist, and myself representing geology and having nominal command, besides 16 assistants, 7 graduate students from Miskatonic, and 9 skilled mechanics. Blah, blah, blah. Lake excitedly pondered a great deal over a strange triangle striated marking in the slate. Lake, blah, blah, blah. Okay, was strangely convinced that the marking he found was the print of some bulky, unknown and radically unclassifiable organism of considerably advanced evolution, notwithstanding that the rock which bore it was so vastly ancient a date, Cambrian, if not actually Precambrian, as to preclude the probable existence not only of all highly evolved life, but of any life at all above the unicellular or at most the trilobite stage. These fragments, with their odd marking, must have been 500 million to 1,000 million years old. Lake's sub-expedition into the unknown, as everyone will recall, sent out its own reports from the shortwave transmitters on the plains, these being simultaneously picked up by our apparatus at the southern base and by the Arkham, which was the name of one of the ships that they used, that was at McMurdo Sound, whence they were relayed to the outside world on wavelengths up to 50 meters. The start was made January 22nd at 4 a.m., and the first wireless message we received came only 2 hours later.
And there's a note from Donlevy saying, actually the reports were never made to the outside world, and the Pikmin Foundation intercepted all of them. That figures from everything we know about the Pikmin Foundation.
That's interesting. Yeah, indeed. This is weird. Let's see, back to Dyer's this letter in his journal here. A later excited message from Lake's moving plane described the mountain range higher than even the Himalayas. Thought of this titanic mountain rampart 700 miles away inflamed our deepest sense of adventure, and we rejoiced that our expedition, if not ourselves personally, had been its discoverers. Some ancient non-human monstrosities in the decadent days had made strange prayers to these mountains, but none ever went near them or dared to guess what lay beyond. No human eye had ever seen them, and as I studied the emotions conveyed in the carvings we later found, I prayed that none ever might. After aerial surveys and a false start, Lake had resolved to do some local boring and set up the drill and put 5 men to work with it while the rest finished settling the camp and repairing a damaged aeroplane. It was about 3 hours afterward, following the first really heavy blast of the operation, that the shouting of the drill crew was heard, and that young acting foreman Gedney rushed into the camp with the startling news that they had struck a cave. Early in the boring, the sandstone had given place to a vein of Comanchean limestone, full of minute fossil cephalopods, corals, echini, and spirifera. Boy, they found some crazy shit. And with occasional suggestions of siliceous sponges and marine vertebrate bones, the latter probably of teleosts, sharks, and ganoids. This in itself was important enough as affording the first vertebrate fossils the expedition had yet secured, but when shortly afterward the drill head dropped through the stratum into apparent vacancy, a wholly new and doubly intense wave of excitement spread among the excavators. A good-sized blast had laid open the subterranean secret, and now, through a jagged aperture, perhaps 5 feet across and 3 feet thick, there yawned before the avid searchers a section of shallow limestone hollowing, worn more than 50 million years ago by the trickling groundwaters of a bygone tropic world. The hollowed layer was not more than 7 or 8 feet deep, but extended off indefinitely in all directions and had a fresh, slightly moving air which suggested its membership in an extensive subterranean system. Stalactites and stalagmites, some of which met in columnar form, but important above all else was the vast deposit of shells and bones, which in places nearly choked the passage. Washed down from unknown jungles of Mesozoic tree ferns and fungi and forests of tertiary cycads, fan palms, and primitive angiosperms, this osseous medley contained representatives of more Cretaceous Eocene and other animal species than the greatest paleontologist could have counted or classified in a year. Mollusks, crustacean armor, fishes, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and early mammals, great and small, known and unknown. No wonder Gedney ran back to the camp shouting, and no wonder everyone else dropped work and rushed headlong through the biting cold to where the tall derrick marked a newfound gateway to secrets of inner earth and vanished eons. When Lake had satisfied the first keen edge of his curiosity, he scribbled a message in his notebook and had young Moulton run back to the camp to dispatch it by wireless. This was my first word of the discovery, and it told of the identification of early shells, bones of ganoids, and placoderms, remnants of, boy, I don't even know how to say that one, Ani. What do you say?
I think labyrinthodonts.
Labyrinthodonts and thecodonts, great mosasaur skull fragments, dinosaur vertebrae and armor plates, pterodactyl teeth and wing bones, Archaeopteryx debris, Miocene shark's teeth, primitive bird skulls, and other bones of archaic mammals such as Paleothers, Xiphodons, Oreodons, and Titanotheres. There was nothing as recent as a mastodon, elephant, true camel, deer, or bovine animal. Hence, Lake concluded that the last deposits had occurred during the Oligocene age and that the hollowed stratum had lain in its present dried, dead, and inaccessible state for at least 30 million years. On the other hand, the prevalence of very early life forms was singular in the highest degree. Though the limestone formation was, on the evidence of such typical embedded fossils as ventriculites, positively and unmistakably Comanchean, and not a particle earlier, the free fragments in the hollow space included a surprising proportion of organisms hitherto considered as peculiar to far older periods. The inevitable inference was that in this part of the world, there had been a remarkable and unique degree of continuity between the life of over 300 million years ago and that of only 30 million years ago. How far this continuity had extended beyond the Oligocene age when the cavern was closed was of course past all speculation. In any event, the coming of the frightful ice in the Pleistocene some 500,000 years ago, a mere yesterday as compared with the age of this cavity, must have put an end to any of the primal forms which had locally managed to outlive their common terms.
And there's a note from Professor Donlevy. Missing wire transcripts by Lake found. Preserved transcripts were folded into journal. Quote, Fowler makes discovery of highest importance in sandstone and limestone fragments from blasts. Several distinct triangular striated prints, like those in Archean slate, proving that source survived from over 600 million years ago to Comanchean times, without more than moderate morphological changes and decrease in average size. Comanchean prints, apparently more primitive or decadent, if anything, than older ones, emphasize importance of discovery in press, will mean to biology what Einstein has meant to mathematics and physics, joins up with my previous work and amplifies conclusions, appears to indicate, as I suspected, the Earth has seen whole cycle or cycles of organic life before known one that begins with Archaeozoic cells, was evolved and specialized not later than 1,000 million years ago, when planet was young and recently uninhabitable for any life forms or normal protoplasmic structure. Question arises when, where, and how development took place.
Let's see, blah, blah, blah. More geological and biological technobabble. Let's see. Okay, let's see. This looks interesting. The remains of 14 ancient life forms, completely unknown to science and unidentifiable as either plants or animals, were found in that underground cave. The descriptions and the phrasing, quote, can't decide whether vegetable or animal, shocked all my senses. Their stratum location put them at a point on the geological timescale much too early for their features to have naturally evolved yet. Lake sending more messages told of the completely successful transportation of the 14 great specimens to Lake's camp. Let's see, the specimens were laid out on the hard snow near the camp, save for one, which Lake was making crude attempts at dissection. Okay, the next part, describes Lake's difficulties dissecting the bodies.
Don Levy notes the first alien autopsy.
Yeah, he was very excited about that. Dyer goes on, existing biology would have to be wholly revised, for this thing was no product of any cell growth science knows about. Upon observation, and on the evidence of these, one could hardly hesitate to call the thing animal. But internal inspection brought up so many vegetable evidences that Lake was left hopelessly at sea. Clearly it was amphibian and probably adapted to long airless hibernation periods as well. The nervous system was so complex and highly developed as to leave Lake aghast. Though excessively primitive and archaic in some respects, the thing had a set of ganglial centers and connectives arguing the very extremes of specialized development. Its 5-lobed brain was surprisingly advanced, and there were signs of the sensory equipment severed in part through the wiry cilia of the head, involving factors alien to any other terrestrial organism. Probably it has more than 5 senses, so that its habits could not be predicted from any existing analogy. It appeared to reproduce like vegetable cryptogems, having spore cases at the tips of their wings and evidently developing from a thallus or a prothallus. We had no name for it. It looked like a radiate, but was clearly something more, and it was partly vegetable, but also had 3/4 of the essentials of animal structure. That it was marine in origin, its symmetrical contour, and certain other attributes clearly indicated, yet one could not be exact as to the limit of its adaptations. The wings held a suggestion of the aerial. How it could have undergone its tremendously complex evolution on a newborn Earth in time to leave prints in Archean rocks was so far beyond conception as to make Lake whimsically recall the primal myths in ancient cultures about great old ones who filtered down from the stars and concocted Earth life as a joke or mistake, and the wild tales of cosmic hill things from outside told by the folklorist and assistant professor at Miskatonic's English department, Albert Wilmarth. Naturally, he considered the possibility of Precambrian prints having been made by a less evolved ancestor of the present specimens, but quickly rejected this too facile theory upon considering the advanced structural qualities of the older fossils.
Don Levy notes, amazing.
Everything would go wrong from that point.
Don Levy says that they were unable to contact Lake since about 10 a.m. According to records, the pilot, McTighe, was awake at 10 o'clock and tried to get Lake on the wireless, but some electrical condition in the air to the west seemed to prevent communication. Technological interference, fascinating. The city or the mountains? Something crippled all the equipment on all 4 planes at once.
Throughout the day, they continuously tried making contact with Lake. Dyer described the plane travel over the nearby massive mountain range.
I think we've had similar technological interference at the Dyer base at different points and could not figure out what was the cause. Every incident of that 4.5-hour flight is burned into my recollection because of its crucial position in my life, said Dyer. It marked my loss at the age of 54 of all that peace and balance which the normal mind possesses through its accustomed conception of external nature and nature's laws. Thenceforth, the 10 of us, but the student Danford and myself above all others, were to face a hideous, amplified world of lurking horrors, which nothing can erase from our emotions, and which we would refrain from sharing with mankind in general if we could. It was as if these stark, nightmare spires marked the pylons of a frightful gateway into forbidden spheres of dream and complex gulfs of remote time, space, and ultra-dimensionality. I could not help feeling that they were evil things, mountains of madness. Did you hear that?
I didn't hear anything.
Let's see. Whose farther slopes looked out over some accursed ultimate abyss. It was young Danforth who drew our notice to the curious regularities of the higher mountain skyline, regularities like clinging fragments of perfect cubes. We were in one of the strangest, weirdest, and most terrible of all corners of Earth's globe. Something about the scene reminded me of the disturbing descriptions of the evilly fabled Plateau of Lang, which occur in the dreaded Necronomicon, confirming our growing convictions that this hideous upland must indeed be that fabled nightmare plateau. Of all existing lands, it was infinitely the most ancient. Mythologists have placed Lang in Central Asia, but the racial memory of man, or of his predecessors, is long, and it may well be that certain tales have come down from lands and mountains and temples of horror earlier than civilization in Asia and earlier than any human world we know. A few daring mystics have hinted at a pre-Pleistocene origin for the fragmentary Naqatic manuscripts and have suggested that the devotees of Tsathoggua were as alien to mankind as Tsathoggua itself. Lang, whether in space or time it might brood, was not a region I would care to be in or near, nor did I relish the proximity of a world that had ever bred such ambiguous and Archean monstrosities as those Lake had mentioned. At the moment, I felt rather sorry that any of us had ever read the abhorred Necronomicon at the university's library. What a monstrous book. I had seen dozens of polar mirages during the preceding weeks, some of them quite as uncanny and fantastically vivid as the present example, but this one had a wholly novel and obscure quality of menacing symbolism, and I shuddered as this seething labyrinth of fabulous walls and towers and minarets loomed out of the troubled ice vapors above our heads. The effect was that of a cyclopean city of no architecture known to man or to human imagination, with vast aggregations of shiny night-black masonry embodying monstrous perversions of geometrical laws. I had considered in my mind that perhaps we had discovered the lost metropolis of Riley, but I recalled that great city sank beneath the present-day Pacific Ocean in a prehistoric cataclysm. The nightmare corpse city of Relay was built in measureless eons beyond history by the vast loathsome shapes that seeped down from the stars. There lay the great old one, Cthulhu, and his hordes of spawn in suspended animation in vaults, awaiting a great awakening where they and the deep ones will rise from the ocean and conquer the surface world. Like Pabodie and myself, Lake and even Danforth had read the copy of the Necronomicon in the university's library, renowned for its rare collections. Danforth was a pilot and a student of Pabodie's, becoming a talented engineer in his own right.
Don Levy notes, Relay, of course. Fabled pre-human city populated by aliens 50 plus million years ago, believed to be located near the Pacific Pole of inaccessibility. The Cthulhuids, Chthonians, aka the Star Spawn, held in suspended animation in the sunken city. Note, see Deep Ones in the Atlantic, see Unearth, Massachusetts, Migo, Yith, Inhumanoids, Kaiju, Titans. Are all the myths and lost histories true?
Well, the doc's writing gets quite manic and sloppy here. I hope he wasn't touching himself. Okay, back to Dyer. There were truncated cones, sometimes terraced or fluted, surmounted by tall cylindrical shafts, here and there, bulbously enlarged and often capped with tiers of thinnish scalloped discs and strange, beetling, table-like constructions, suggesting piles of multitudinous rectangular slabs or circular plates or five-pointed stars with each one overlapping the one beneath. There were composite cones and pyramids, either alone or surmounting cylinders, or cubes or flatter truncated cones and pyramids, and occasional needle-like spires and curious clusters of five. All of these febrile structures seemed knit together by tubular bridges crossing from one to the other at various dizzy heights, and the implied scale of the whole was terrifying and oppressive in its sheer gigantism. I was amazed at the size of a ramp that wound around a tower in the prehistoric city. It was like the kind once climbing outside the monstrous towers of ziggurats of antique Babylon. The horror my colleagues and I found at the camp was a horror my mind partially concealed still to this day. In our investigation, we found a destroyed camp and dead dogs and men. We had suspected the missing Gedney had gone mad and slaughtered them. The wounds and gore appeared as if some form of experiments had been done. We dared not entertain wilder possibilities. It was hard work keeping our personal emotions out of this matter, and we later did not mention numbers or say exactly how we had found those which we did find. We had, by that time, agreed not to transmit anything suggesting madness on the part of Lake's men, and it surely seemed like madness to mention the 8 perfect specimens mentioned by Lake seemed to have been completely blown away.
Don Levy writes, on the first expedition to set up a permanent base that would become Dyer's station in 1999, we flew a plane over the imposing mountain range that 1931 survivors described. Everything was still there. The ancient onyx city Dyer described was there. As the crews were setting up camps that would build the permanent station not far from the original site, I took a crew into the city following the same trail as Dyer and Danforth flew across the mountains, which they discovered was the outer walls of a vast, abandoned stone city, alien to any human architecture. With their resemblance to creatures of myth mentioned in the Necronomicon, the builders of this lost civilization were dubbed the Elder Things. Indeed, I concur.
The graduate student Danforth and I learned from our study of the wall carvings in the city that the city's inhabitants, referred to as elder things, first arrived on Earth shortly after the moon took form when water still covered the entire planet. We had difficulty imagining an advanced civilization going back 1 billion years.
And Don Levy notes, holy shit, the first ancient astronauts.
Yeah, like that dude on the History Channel. Yeah. They settled first in the Antarctic Ocean. From what we gathered, the Antarctic region would forever be their sacred homeland as they further spread their empire. These beings built huge cities on dry land of Pangaea and underwater. The star spawn of Cthulhu and the Migo arrived on Earth shortly afterwards and came into conflict with the Elder Things.
Don Levy notes, confusingly, both the Elder Things and Chthonians, Deep Ones, Migo, and Great Race of Yith they warred with were all referred interchangeably as Old Ones or Great Old Ones. Then there's the much more powerful Outer Gods or Other Gods, see Gods of the Outer Hells, dwelling mostly beyond Earth, such as Shub-Nugganoth, ruled over by Azathoth. Nyarlathotep, a tall man made of shadow, is the avatar of the Outer Gods. Functions as an intermediary between the deities of this pantheon and their cults, roaming Earth before the Old Ones return. So I guess Nyarlathotep is the tall man at the base, maybe?
I guess so. That's a disturbing thought.
First scout, I guess.
Okay, back to Dyer. From everything we know, said Dyer, we have read from ancient tomes like the Necronomicon, the Book of Azathoth, Unspeakable Cults, Tobin's Spirit Guide, and these drawings. The Old Ones are extraterrestrial and interdimensional aliens who discovered how to travel to Earth through space and time and from the space between spaces. This advanced civilization, the Elder Things, were the first extraterrestrial species to come to the Earth, colonizing the planet about 1 billion years ago. Damn colonists. During the eons-long Great Wars between the Elder Things and the Chthonian star spawn, Deep Ones, the Migo, and the Great Race of Yith, the earlier colonists were driven for a time wholly under the seas. The Elder Things saw this as a major blow to their expanding empire of interconnected colony cities on land and near water areas around the world. After Cthulhu's colony city of Relay was sunk in that lost catastrophe, the Elder Things cities dotted all the surface land and water areas again.
Don Levy notes, from Lake's notes and anatomical drawings, and Dyer's notes and drawings, I am able to reconstruct a picture of their anatomy. They had barrel-shaped, ribbed bodies, wings, and faces like starfish. Though they could make use of both organic and inorganic substances, the Elder Things were carnivorous by preference. Intelligence did not equal vegetarians there. Take that, vegans. I guess that's Don Levy's perspective. The bodies of the Elder Things were also amphibious, incredibly tough, and capable of withstanding the pressures of ocean depths. Being semi-aquatic, their faces resembled starfish. They were mortal, though. They rarely died except by accident or violence. These beings were also capable of hibernating for vast epochs of time. That seems to explain what happened to Lake's camp. They were still alive after millions of years. We still have an opportunity to potentially locate lived ones. Interestingly, Lake found that unlike many other Old One races, the Elder Things were made of normal terrestrial matter. They can be killed. Fascinating. How many other Old Ones can be killed? Travel was shown to be very frequent, with constant commerce between different cities being extensive, yet no craft or ancient spaceships have been found. Apparently, from the notes of Dyer and the autopsies, they made minimal use of high technology, as their natural resilience and movement abilities made many forms of life support and transportation completely unnecessary. The cyan soapstones found by both expeditions were suspected of being pieces of perhaps currency. Dyer inferred their form of government must have been highly complex, possibly socialistic. Possible evidence of advanced directed energy weaponry we may be able to reverse engineer for defense contracting. Vertical Corp was hoping for a starship or a gate, but would still be very interested in Eldarian particle weapons. They were advanced genetic engineers, knowing to have genetically engineered many life forms. They engineered creatures called Shoggoths, amoeba-like biological automatons designed to carry out tasks, seemingly not intended to have full sentience. But as they were programmed with increasingly complex tasks, they developed consciousness and evolved. Allegedly, the ancestral forms of all native life on Earth potentially evolved from the cellular material left over from the creation of the Shoggoths.
Donlevy referred to their highly organized form of government as socialistic, but what does he know of socialism? Yeah, socialist may be a name only, like the USSR under Stalin or North Korea, given you could argue they had genetically engineered and exploited class they see as little more than shape-shifting robots and power lifters.
Yeah, so nothing new under the sun, pre-human tankies. It did seem contradictory to say they were socialistic and then that they had this race of beings doing tasks for them, but I guess there's an element of unintended consequences. Like, there are a lot of socialists who advocate having robots to do everything. They didn't necessarily intend these creatures to be sentient, so who knows? I mean, it's kind of speculative anyway. So Donlevy notes, My God. These elder things used these living machines to build their huge cities, both on dry land and underwater. Loads were drawn by beasts of burden, Shoggoths under the sea, and a variety of primitive and more complex vertebrates, also engineered for land use. Holy shit, they likely engineered dinosaurs as beasts of burden on land. The elder things were also illustrated to have had very advanced agriculture and vast underwater and surface hydroponic farms.
Nice.
The murals on the walls described them as possessing extensive vineyards and having domesticated many prehistoric animals as workforce and as pets. They kept 6-foot-tall blind albino penguins as livestock. They even engineered a primitive primate that looked similar to humans and were kept as entertainment. So we were monkeys who danced for their amusement? Well, humans might even be an industrial byproduct of their genetic engineering of the Shoggoths after all. Disgusting thought. Those carvings Dyer found in the Eldarian lost city of Antarctica, I can confirm, show they possessed an understanding of cosmology and physics, at least equivalent to that of humanity as of the mid-20th century and beyond. From what we have observed, they were long-lived, and since they reproduced through spores, there was little biological basis for families as we understand them to form, and were thus grouped together with others with whom they would get along. Eldarian families, in quotes, lived in large dwellings where furniture and other decoration was placed in the center of the rooms to leave the walls open for those ornate murals that served as a historical record of their society.
Take that, nuclear family. Looks like maybe they even had found families. Who knows? Back to Dyer's letter. Humans, like ants, at the feet of these giants were an afterthought to these monstrosities, but in that city there were signs of genetically improved primates, Neanderthals, and early humans that had been experimented on by the elder things, like starfish-faced mad scientists. I wish the anthropologist Dr. Trask was there to examine the remains. There were carvings showing other civilizations, including early advanced human ones, perhaps Atlantis, Mu, or Lemuria, rising at the end of this era of Old One wars and supremacy. Another showed the recently speculated Agartha tribe that thrived under Tibet, as many of these lizard men were moved into ancient tunnels bored by Old Ones, allowing them to survive dinosaur extinction. They worshipped a shape-shifting underwater Old One called the Dragon King, according to the Necronomicon. I noticed a shiny cyan soapstone on the floor and picked it up, noticing it was smooth like a pearl. The image of a black sky raining blood filled my mind's eye with a flash. I had a vivid waking nightmare of massive storms, seas boil, killing fish, dust bowls and deserts expand across continents, ice sheets melt at both poles, dying earth animals. On the coast of colonized continents, armies of deep ones ascend to the Eldarian cities on land as Tiamat pulled down and sank towers, and the tentacles and heads of Mother Hydra wrap around an underwater Eldarian city and grabs onto bridges and crushing other non-human architectural structures. The massive Dagon walks out of the ocean and onto land, attacking Elder Thing cities. Other deep ones rise from the waters and attack the Eldarian population. When they see Dagon, members of competing cults commit bloody mass sacrifices. Volcanoes erupt, sending ash into the skies. Relay and its star spawn rise from the depths of the Pacific, and the massive Cthulhu rises from the Pacific waters like a walking mountain lurching toward Antarctica. Massive earthquakes shake land masses, followed by tsunamis. I saw ancient towers of unknown metal, stone, and glass fall in the cities of the Elder Things. I see mad crowds of the aliens infected by a plague turn on each other, killing each other with anything they could get their so-called hands on. Their Shoggoths attacked and destroyed anything in their path. Giant eldritch monsters heralding extinction flooded my mind. The Japanese have an old mythological word for strange beast, kaiju. The massive native kaiju of different shapes and types like Kraken, Leviathan, Tiamat, Behemoth arose from the earth and oceans in response to the chaos and planetary upheaval. I collected myself and put the shiny stone in my pocket. The carving of a large egg caught my attention.
Don Levy notes, what caused Dyer's vision? Is it the soapstone? Dr. Tate seems to have a cyan soapstone necklace. Dr. Tate is not what she seems. Close quote. I had the same experience. I saw the starfish creatures when I touched that soapstone. So
interesting.
Yeah, it seemed like that soapstone has ended up on the base.
Things are becoming clearer. Back to Dyer's letter. At the Elder Thing's most sacred site, the southern pole of inaccessibility, they genetically engineered an Antarctic beast, a chimeric protector made in their own god's image. The protector is attuned to the orgone, a kind of universal psychic field, swirling across the world and centered like a hurricane at geographic poles of inaccessibility. The protector is drawn to respond to psychic distress, awakened and strengthened by collective faith. The Elder Things apparently engineered this creature to defeat the Deep Ones, and especially Cthulhu, should he awaken near the Pacific Pole. of inaccessibility. The chimera would hatch from an egg in the Earth's 0 hour to win the Great War against the Chthonian star spawn. I could not find a name that matched anything in the Necronomicon, just the symbol on the wall that seemed to match the word protector. Other carvings show the egg was lost during the Shoggoth uprising.
Don Levy notes, I think we may have found this egg. We have at least found the largest egg ever on record by taking core samples that led to finding that massive egg. It must be the same ancient egg engineered by the Elder Things. I will not share this information about the Protector with anyone but Morale. What's this chicken scratch Dyer wrote in the margin? Some kind of alien language? Could go for a bucket of chicken.
The Elder Things also planted seeds for 6 earthly creatures across the remaining 6 continents. Great strange beasts that would emerge in a situation of existential threat. Eventually, their all-purpose servitor race, the Shoggoths, rebelled. This upheaval hastened the decline and ultimate collapse of their civilization as more effort was invested in quelling the rebellions to the detriment of advancing anything else. Although the Elder Things managed to initially subdue the Shoggoths after their attempted rebellion, the Shoggoths continued to evolve physiologically, increasing in intelligence and developing the capacity to live on land.
Don Levy notes that Danforth had the misfortune of being attacked by a surviving, multi-eyed blob horror that matched the carvings of a Shoggoth. Ultimately, it was the cooling of the planet during the last ice age that doomed them. The Elder Things last retreated to their underwater cities deep in the ocean, having no further contact with the outer world. Their last surface city is the one located on a high plateau in the Antarctic. Imaging has shown their last known undersea city is located directly beneath the Elder Things' ultimate surface city in the Antarctic and was apparently overrun by the Shoggoths. Don Levy notes that those Shoggoths would make excellent urban pacification bioweapons if they could be controlled. He wonders, is that Vertical Corp's angle? They dared refuse my laser mice. They at least have sights on marketing my krill shakes and Soylent rice cakes, and were very interested in those frozen worms that I found using core samples into ancient ice. So we knew he was scheming. I guess we know a few more of his schemes now. So Don Levy continues, while exploring the city with my group, we located the giant one-eyed penguins used as livestock and were attacked by a Shoggoth. It killed everyone but me and the pilot. That ghastly inhuman image in my face. I can only describe the pure otherworldly horror as...
It just describes random pie recipes for several pages and rambles off things about the Voynich manuscript, the Black Pit, the Carven Rim, the Proto-Shoggoths, something about the windowless solids with 5 dimensions, Oxurmak, the gods of entropy, anime, chaos, were scribbled in the margins. He mentions visions of the shadowy tall man in the corners of the world. Also, the nameless cylinder, the elder pharaohs, something called Yog-Sothoth, the primal white jelly, whatever that is, the color out of space, the eyes in the darkness, the moon ladder, the original, the eternal, the undying, all are written in the margins. Lots of good prog rock bands, really, if you think about it, names and album titles here.
Careful, D. Slow your roll.
And he says that the penguins are not what they seem. Holy shit, I was getting contact madness from reading his writing.
Yeah. Take a few deep breaths before continuing.
Okay, I think I purged it. Whew. Okay, I felt great relief, Dyer said, that we survived, but it was tempered by dread as we flew away from the lost city in the massive mountain range. I could still hear the wind's strange piping that reminded me of the penguins of the abyss and the Shoggoths. I wished that I had wax-stopped ears like Ulysses' men off the Siren's coast to keep that disturbing sound from reaching into my mind. Sometimes I still hear it. My time spent at the state sanatorium and the shock therapy did little to silence it. Danforth saw some final horror as we escaped, and his encounter with the Shoggoth made him hysterical. He convinced himself it must have been a mirage. I worry for his mind. There seemed to be a culture of unorthodox grad students at Miskatonic. A brilliant student of Miskatonic University, Randolph Carter, disappeared on October 7, 1927. As with other experts from the university, not unlike the controversial medical student Dr. Herbert West, who became obsessed with discovering the chemical basis for life to disastrous results, Crawford Tillinghast was a disturbed physicist expelled from Miskatonic University for his unorthodox experiments. Pabodie and Danforth obsessively studied the Necronomicon, the Book of Ibon, and the Nacoptic manuscripts in the library as they attempted to reconstruct his invention, the Tillinghast resonator, a device that made other dimensions detectable.
Donlevy notes, my kind of scientists.
It goes into explaining Tillinghast's device, above my pay grade, but something familiar about it.
Yeah, other dimensions. So, Professor Donlevy notes, Pabodie and Danforth turned the dangerous Tillinghast resonator that made parallel universes around us visible into a receiving radio for broadcasts and signals from the future. No deaths so far, only minor insanity, possibly from disturbing alternate timelines. Danforth ranted about atom bombs, zombies, a mind-controlling talking fox, and a Death Star. A note by a psych ward doctor said he was obsessed with television. He carved "No Fate" all over his padded cell. One future it was receiving signals from was clearly our present. Tachyons, quantum entanglement.
This is interesting. So they used these ancient occult tomes as blueprints to turn a machine that was meant to see other dimensions into the time foam. Okay, Dyer says that a hall was named after Poor Lake, and Pabodie went back to the engineering department. That we will discover that lost city on this expedition seems in hindsight not to be an accident of fate. I hired local occult detective and Miskatonic University professor Dr. John Harrison Faust of the Hobbs End Detective Agency to investigate. He would later learn Professor Lake utilized the Necronomicon, Nacoptic manuscripts, Atlantis and the Lost Lemuria by William Scott Elliott for clues to the location of the Antarctic city. There was an ulterior motive to the Nathaniel Derby Pikmin Foundation financing this expedition. Our discoveries were not being transmitted to the public. The public knows of the Miskatonic expedition through frequent wireless reports to the Arkham Advertiser and Associated Press, making no mention of our most radical discoveries, and the later articles of Pabodie and myself were discredited as the work of unstable cranks. The university has lost all the original wire transcripts. As long as I live, I will stop any future Antarctic expeditions to that location. According to entries in dusty tomes such as Imago Mundi by Gautier de Metz, Remnants of Lost Empires by Otto Dostmann, and the Lost Prophecies of Michel Nostradamus, there are entries that align with rumors of a lost city in Australia's Great Sandy Desert. My hope is it is not harboring fearing some other eldritch horror to unleash on the world. I planned to be on that expedition in 1935. Finally, I'll return to the mother country, starting with a visit to fellow travelers in Berkeley on the West Coast before crossing the country to my home in Boston. Signed, Dr. William Dyer.
Don Levy notes that despite Dyer's warnings, it seems the Pikmin Foundation seized the Tillinghast machine, what we now know as the Time Phone, and continued the work of investigating the ancient sites in Antarctica. So to quote a letter from Pikmin written at the same time as Dyer's letter, "Dear Mr. Pavodi, we are encouraged by the news you have sent us of your current progress with the Tillinghast resonator. We had feared the machine was irreparably damaged, but you have achieved unforeseeable improvements, far beyond anything we imagined. The information you have sent us is invaluable to our project. Sincerely, the board of the Nathaniel Derby Pikmin Foundation at Miskatonic University. Edward Morrell, Algernon Macon, Clark Axton, Daniel Upton, Amos Tuttle, Nathaniel Derby Pikmin." And a final note from Don Levy. "I think I recall in 2014 or 2015, a technology and science scholar, Donna Haraway, gave a talk entitled Anthropocene, Capitalocene, Cthulhucene, Staying with the Trouble, where she proposed the term Cthulhucene as an alternative to the concept of the Anthropocene era, due to the entangling interconnectedness of all supposedly individual beings. Note, quote, Cthulhucene does not close in on itself, it does not round off, its contact zones are ubiquitous and continuously spin out loopy tendrils, close quote. Interesting that the Foundation is selling their secret likely world domination plans based on stopping the sixth great extinction. That's my speculation though. The Foundation had to have been able to convince the US and New Zealand governments and Silicon Valley guru Edison Fordham's Vertical Corp with the promises of advanced genetic and other technologies that could be gleaned from this dead civilization that incidentally created most life on Earth. Probably helped that Fordham has a bunker in New Zealand hoping to ride out climate change.
And he has another interesting last little note at the bottom here. Let's see, he continued that over the course of my study of this journal, I have corresponded with the Pikmin Foundation. I have sought clarification on why they chose to establish Dyer Station, given William Dyer's dire warnings and the contents of the city. They have replied that if I sign a non-disclosure agreement and pledge allegiance to the Foundation, they can offer information, a pay raise, and more bottom boys like Morrell and Upton. It looks like Dr. Tate is gearing up to seize control of Dyer Station, so I'll head for greener pastures when flights resume after the Antarctic winter.
To be continued.